host, David Ducker, coming back at you. And today we're going to be talking about the media is the message. The medium of communication influences what the actual content of the communication is. And our context, of course, is role-playing games. So what I'm really trying to ask is, what do role-playing games do well compared to other media, to other mediums of communication? So let's give some examples of different media. So a newspaper is print media. A novel is a different form of print media. It might do some things better than a newspaper, and a newspaper might do some things better than a novel. Right here, a video log, that's one form of media, versus a TV show, which is episodic every week, versus a film, which is one shot at glory, but it's a little bit longer, bigger budget typically. Comic books, which are a visual media, but you can get a lot out of them at the same time, versus a painting. You know, there are some stories that are better told in one media than another. And sometimes, even if you're trying to tell the same story, it's a good idea to adapt it, what the story is, to fit your media. Video games, board games, these are other media as well. Video games is a huge, huge one. And there are subcategories in video games. There's console gaming, there's handheld gaming, there's PC gaming, there's the arcade, there's on your phone, and they're all a little bit different from each other as far as what they do well and what they do poorly. I'm sure you've heard some people say, "I'll only play shooters on the PC, won't play them on a console," because the PC does it better. And that's because the PC is a slightly different form of media. It's a different medium for that communication of entertainment. So let's look at some cross-media platforms. The ones that spring to mind are, let's get The Watchman. It was originally a comic book, but it did have some text as well. So it had full pages of text in addition to pictures with words. And Alan Moore, the author, used that to tell his story. And then when Zack Snyder took that story and said, let's bring it out of the comic book media, put it into a film media, what did he need to change? What could he not tell in a film? He couldn't have pages of text. He couldn't have long narration. It had to be quick, spontaneous. Get into that 3-hour time window and make sure it's visually interesting in a very different way from static images. It's moving images that we have to deal with now. So he made some changes. He cut out a lot of subplots. He simplified some characters. He had less backstory. One thing he did was he put a big montage at the very front of the movie over the credits, of the opening credits. That montage, and that told the history of the world and the Watchmen. Whereas in the comic book, they didn't do that. They didn't have to. They had other ways to tell that story of the history in the world. They had flashbacks. They had text that you could read through, fake newspaper articles and excerpts from fictional biographies and such. They couldn't do that in the film. It would be boring. It'd take too much time. It would destroy the momentum, because in print media, the consumer controls the momentum. In the film, the director controls the momentum. So it's very different. You could also look at something like V for Vendetta, another Alan Moore comic book. When it was adapted by the Wachowskis to the big screen, they pumped in a huge amount of action, compared to the comic book, which is more subdued, more black and white. The Wachowskis said, we want color, we want motion, we want momentum, we want fight scenes. And also they dumbed it down a little bit. That might be mean, because I love the film version. But in the novel, in the graphic novel rather, the villains were more villainous. The hero was more villainous. Everyone was more villainous in the novel. There was much less good versus evil, much less black and white. It was something that wanted to make you ask questions. Whereas in the film version, they made the hero more heroic, more sympathetic. They made the villain, um, in some ways, less sympathetic as well, more of a villain, um, and more simplified. He wasn't trying to fulfill his philosophy. He was just more of a generic villain. You could see some of his philosophy, but it wasn't expounded upon because they didn't have time to do it. It would have killed the momentum. There were market reasons beside that, I'm sure, as well. So there's been like a long 6-minute preamble. What is media? What are the different medias? How do you have to change? But people seem to have trouble understanding this. So role-playing games are a form of media. They are a medium of communication. And they do some things very, very well, and they don't do other things very well at all, especially when you're in competition with video games, films, novels, graphic novels. And so what do role-playing games do well? What do they do better than anything else? Well, role-playing, obviously. Their only real competition in terms of immersion, in terms of role-playing, in terms of stepping out of your own shoes, and directing your destiny is video games. Video games are interactive. Most other media is static. So video games have their script. It's a branching storyline usually. Role-playing games can be completely improvisational. They can evolve on the fly because you have a reactive writer there who knows all about the setting, the history, the physics. So it can be so spontaneous. So spontaneity is one thing that role-playing games do better than any other media. Instant feedback, unlimited freedom to do whatever you want. You don't bump into invisible walls. If you're watching CSI and you're like, oh, you should ask him this question. The detective should ask him this question. And the detective doesn't. You're like, oh man, that's a jack. And then the story, because it's static, it relies on him not having asked that question because maybe there was no answer. In the role-playing game, they're going to ask that question. You better have an answer. So being an interactive media, you need to have a greater depth of your setting as well to reap those dividends. So that's one thing. So freedom, interactivity. Role-playing games do this better than anything else. If you want your role-playing to be competitive with other media, make it the most freedom that they've ever seen in media. Give them the most interactivity that they've ever encountered. If you're playing a role-playing game and you take away their freedom, you take away the interactivity, you make it into a railroad, you're missing out on the strength of your medium. At that point, if you've taken this weapon away, you've got your two fists, and somebody ties your fist behind your back, you're fighting one-handed now. Because video games are on a railroad or a very simple branching structure. But they have things we can't do. They have a cast of voice actors. They have computer graphics. They resolve the mechanics instantly. They have professional writers going over this whole thing. So video games, if you try to compete with them in terms of writing, in terms of voice acting, in terms of mechanics, you just can't do it because you're only one man. You don't have the budget that they have. So if you try to fight them where they're strong, you're going to lose. And if you take away the thing you have that they don't have, you're going to lose. All right, so that one thing there is freedom to move. The other thing that role-playing games do better than anything else is creativity. You can write your own character. You can make him look like whatever you want. You have his history, his where he's from, his friends, his family, his goals, dreams, his own religion. you can do anything you want with that character. A video game, you know, it'll allow you to swap out different heads, different armor sets. Maybe you know, Dragon Age, it'll let you pick like 9 different backgrounds, which for a video game is a lot, but that's nothing compared to a role-playing game where you just make your own. You have unlimited options. So the creativity there, the customization that you have in a role-playing game is something nothing else can beat. So if you push that and you give your players complete creative freedom, then they're going to say, this is way better than any video game. Video game can't do this. This is something that I can only get from a role-playing game. And then you're going to have them in the palm of your hand. You're going to have them come back week after week. You're going to have them work hard to make the game fun. They're going to be on time. They're going to be in character. Whereas if you take the freedom away from them and you say, oh, well, you have to pick one of these 8 classes, or even one of these 150 classes if you're playing Warhammer, you know. It's like, oh, well, I think like World of Warcraft has like 8 classes, so I got just as much creative freedom playing WoW as I do in a role-playing game, so why would I come to a role-playing game? WoW has voice acting, writing, mechanics, you know, thousands of other players that I can interact with. You know, if you take away your strength, you try to fight them where they're strong, you're going to lose. You know, and I've seen people lose players to video games. And myself, if I'm having as much fun at your game as I'm having playing Skyrim at home, because I love Skyrim, then I'm not going to leave my house, drive, buy snacks, you know, especially in you know, I live in Canada, so I've driven to games in blizzards, power outages. I've had trees down across the road, and I'm like, I'm going to game though because Skyrim doesn't give me what this game gives me. If that game was only as good as Skyrim, if I had no creative freedom, if I had no customization on my character, or even if it was only at the level of Skyrim, you know, why would I drive through a blizzard? Why would I buy chips and soda? There's when I could just sit at home, I'll eat all the chips at home. So you have to recognize what you do well, what you do poorly, and you want to accentuate your strength and hide your weakness. The strength of role playing is unlimited freedom, unlimited creativity, and that if you push that, you say you can do whatever you want, and you can be whoever you want to be, and we can make the world whatever we want to make it. That's something they can't find anywhere else, so they're going to be coming to you. Whereas if you say, okay, we've got 8 classes, and we're going to run you through this railroad, but it's got 2 possible endings, and it's like, yeah, but Skyrim has the same thing, except voice acting, graphics, and you know, I get to stay at home where it's warm. You know, I could play Skyrim in my pajamas, whereas if I leave the house, I got to get dressed. I know it sounds silly, but every little advantage you can get to get your players to your game is going to help you out. Every little increment, you know, no grain of sand is going to be the whole beach by itself. But if you concentrate on all the little details, eventually you'll have this great mountain. So that's what I'm emphasizing. See what you do well and focus on that. See what you do poorly and just leave that at the door. And for role-playing games, it's customization and freedom. It's creativity. It's a shared, improvised experience. It's writing. It's acting. It is role-playing. And that's something you can't get anywhere else. So if you give them that, they'll come back. They'll be grateful. They'll share the hobby, grow the hobby with other people. They'll say, oh man, I know you like Skyrim, but you got to try this role-playing gimmick. You know, get some GURPS, get some D6 system, get some Savage Worlds. Because it's so different from anything else. Whereas if you're all the same, if you're the same as everything else, it's like, You know, that's a tough battle to fight. You know, try to fight EA, try to fight Acclaim, try to fight these big companies, 2K Games. I don't want to fight them. Blizzard, I don't want none of Blizzard. I just want to offer something they don't offer. So I have the best players in my town. They want my game because my game is just a little bit better than the game down the street. So that's my long ramble. I've done this, almost this exact same ramble before. Hopefully, get some more views this time. Hopefully, people understand it better. I've expressed myself more clearly, I hope. So let me know what you think about the media being the message, the medium of role-playing games. What do we do well? What don't we do well? How can we stay competitive with video games? How can we get this player who's on the fence and pull him over the fence into the deep end, playing his character? So, I'd love to hear more comments below. Until I see you again, good day and good gaming.